YouTube. It is SteamnextFest February 2026 edition, and today is day 4, where I have saved all the story-rich and puzzle games. We are about to check out NonPlatonic Forms, a spicy theological visual novel. So there is adult content in this. This is an 18+ game, so just a heads up, if you don't want to see that, you might want to check out one of the other videos. It says, a theologically spicy visual novel about loving the artistic process a little too literally. This looks very interesting. Hand-drawn supernatural romance, dark fantasy sort of visual novel. There are some mature content warnings saying that it is a horror romance and contains body horror, psychological horror, BDSM scenarios, unhealthy relationship dynamics, and occasional gore. So just a heads up for all of that. But let's check it out. Sorry, we're booked solid. No space left. But I'm sure someone else will have room for you. No, I'm sorry. Our hotel doesn't have any openings. Yeah, the manager said we can get real busy this time of year. Don't know why, I just started here. Take care. Hello, you've reached the front desk of... Oh, a reservation? Sure, what name is it under? Liam Lee? Nope, I don't see anything for that name. Oh, okay, I'll check that too. Jeanette Street Theater. Hey, isn't that where they do the Fall Film Festival? Nah, nothing for you in the system. Looks like you should have booked ahead. Hi, this is... Whoa. Slow down, man. Okay, so someone else made the reservation for you? Oh yeah, the festival. Forgot they were doing that this weekend. My boyfriend dragged me to that once. Kind of boring, but it was cool the way they showed films on those old projectors. Those things are ancient. I wonder how they even still work. But I'm not seeing any reservations for you, and we don't have any rooms free. Try the place down the street. They usually have plenty. No, I'm terribly sorry about this. It's such a small event. I'm kind of shocked to see that we've sold out. If you try one of the other hotels in the area, you should be able to find something. Have a good week, sir. Lee leaned back in his seat, tossing the phone aside. He rubbed at his aching eyes and tried to roll the stiffness out of his shoulders. But it was no good. If the long drive hadn't tired him out, that round of phone calls had certainly finished him off. The same film event he'd been hired to swoop in and save had run him out of his room. With so much of the festival to prepare, it was easy for one lone mechanic to slip through the cracks. Lee felt a yawn burrowing out of his chest, and he turned up the radio, hoping the loud music would compensate. His job frequently kept him on the move, trundling from one cinema to the next. He was good with a variety of projectors, old and new, which kept him a steady stream of work. But lacking any sort of regular employer kept his day-to-day supplies wedged in his car, a veritable waste paper basket, compacted over and over and never emptied. Lee kicked aside one of the gaggle of empty soda cups rolling about and bumping against his brake pedal. He could sleep in here under a blanket of toolboxes and takeout wrappers. How cozy. He yawned again. A last-minute call had taken him way outside his planned area this morning, and tonight's drive was a bit much, even for him. Most places didn't bother promising lodgings, but these guys needed Leon for a high-profile week of antique films and talks from higher-profile cinema critics. He'd be within his right to be upset, but he'd much rather get even. He never let anyone wriggle out of an agreement with him so easily. Already smirking at the thought, Lee drove to the theater. Once he'd reached the door, Lee rifled through his keyring. There it was, the master key for the Jeanette Street Theater. Safe and snug as the day they'd given it to him 5 years ago. It was easier for theaters to leave copies in his hands than to ask for them back when he was done. Much better for everyone if their handyman could come and go quietly. Filmgoers wouldn't have to see maintenance, and Lee wouldn't have to see any of them. Perfect. As he reached his hand out to insert the key, something thin and fine gleamed beneath the warm marquee light. A large spiderweb stretched across the entrance, a few long and lonely strands forming the base of the spiral weave which was to follow. The corner of Lee's mouth tugged up. A spider could accomplish a huge and impressive web overnight, but the little dummies always seemed to choose the most harebrained spots. Lee leaned down eye to eye with the tiny arachnid. Hey, you've got the right idea, but aren't you punching just slightly above your weight class? As expected, the spider did not respond. You should move, you know. You're in my way, and you can't blame me for what I'm about to do. As expected, the spider did not move. Lee shrugged, his hand breached the web, delicate strands snapping soundlessly, floating and wrapping around his bare arm. Lee watched them cling to his skin. Sorry, buddy. Next time, upgrade to hemp rope. Tip from a pro. It takes a lot more than this to trap me. You are just courting disaster, sir. Also, I didn't get into this visual novel because I was expecting a spider romance, okay? If there's a spider romance, I don't know if I can handle this. The spider scuttled away, and Lee entered the building. The turn-of-the-century architecture was more flabby than chic, with flat, trim, and mid-century paint coating the natural charm of the original brickwork. Flyers for local indie showings sat side by side with ads for new releases, unmooring the building from an easily ascertainable time period. Lee took it all in and his shoulders relaxed. This was definitely an upgrade from any hotel room. It had been a long drive, so Lee stretched his legs and strolled through the empty building. With no bodies taking up space, the sound of his footfalls echoed. This was the best way to experience any location. Lights off and devoid of human interruptions. It would absolutely be a shock to the folks who worked there, coming in to find him asleep the next day. But what were they going to do? Fire him? In the dark of the night, his confidence was full to bursting. He chuckled. He was much too valuable to every cinema in the tri-state area. They didn't have to like him, but if they were hoping to have all their projectors in working order, they'd have to make do with a weird little man sleeping in their buildings once or twice. He poked around behind the concession stand and found a clean trash bag full of popcorn. Theaters often overestimated the demand, and there was always someone smuggling the remainder for snacking. Lee shook open a paper bag and helped himself. The popcorn was already stale, but looting it himself made the salt stand out on his tongue. I don't want spider romance either, even if it has a human form. I don't know if it actually does. I know nothing about this game. It's said that it was a spicy theological game, so I was not expecting spiders. He thought about poking around the offices, but there wasn't anything in there he hadn't seen before. If he wanted an interesting story, he'd have to wait until the projectors were running tomorrow. And they wouldn't run if he didn't get to sleep soon. He finished his popcorn, tossed the bag into an empty can, and then made his way up to the projectionist booth. He passed by the modern projectors, each already loaded with a digital copy of the latest blockbuster. They were supposed to be completely secured against tampering, but Lee's collection of hard drives at home had proven that false. He strolled from machine to machine looking for anything interesting. But there was nothing in these that Lee didn't already have at home. He moved on towards the antiques. The cinema specialized in older films, and there were a wall of canisters holding antique prints. Lee perused them, but didn't dream of helping himself. These were already archived and well cared for. If he wanted to preserve these stories, then his job would be to make sure that they were seen during the event tomorrow. He pulled up his phone and was quickly hit with a barrage of missed text notifications. Hey David, I had a great time the other night, and maybe I'm moving a little fast, but... Lee blocked the number. Steve, I know you said you don't do second dates, but... Blocked. What up, Mike? I know it's been a while. Blocked, blocked, blocked. Something was really bringing the text out of the woodwork tonight. He briefly considered checking to see if any of them lived in the area, but his mouth puckered and he shook his head, scrolling past the new texts and adding a few preemptive blocks. He'd rather sleep in the car again than have to discuss a single one of those bedroom choices in the light of day. Lee found a stretch of floor that seemed comfortable enough and rolled up his jacket. Time to grab some shut-eye. The place would be bustling with life, fresh films, and new ideas. He'd see all of that in the morning. He assumed that he would. It was a baseless assumption. Something sharp was stabbing him in the face. Lee rolled over, clutching his cheek, and sat up. With his free hand, he grabbed for the object. He found between his fingers a long screw. It was rusted and stripped from overuse. And when he looked up, he couldn't recognize where he was. What was with those lights? Even closing his eyes tight, he couldn't block them out. His vision a haze of blazing red. He threw up an arm to shield his face and waited for his eyes to adjust. The house lights were down, but the footlights were on. A line of specials and spotlights were trained on him, blanketing Lee in their suffocating heat. With a pang of shock, he looked to see what kind of audience had been watching him sleep. But the rows upon rows of seats were empty and covered in cobwebs. The once intricate plaster designs of the walls were crumbling, the crushed velvet of the seats threadbare and black with crusty dead mold. Concrete details seemed to ebb and flow from within the generally murky atmosphere. There was a faint aroma of charred cinnamon and the vague bitter scent of something completely unfamiliar. But those smells, too, were overcome with rot. Here and there a plant poked out from the tiled floor or a loose lighting fixture, but even these twisted seedlings were brown and dry. Nothing fresh could thrive here, not in this stifling, dusty husk of a building. Lee frowned. He'd fallen asleep in the booth. Why was he here on the stage now? Did the Jeanette even have a stage? Many old theaters had been converted to cinemas back in the day. A wide screen stretched where actors once trod, hiding the old workings from the public. But Lee was certain that the Jeanette house had been made to hold a couple hundred at most. This one could easily seat a few thousand. Lee did his best to think clearly, but his mind struggled to wade from thought to thought. If he didn't hold firmly to each concept, they were liable to float away. Lee's confusion dissolved into the air. The truth seemed obvious. Lee was dreaming. And hey, a lucid dream was a free pass for a wild sexcapade. Womp womp. Getting straight to it, okay. Okay, we are gonna play in streaming mode. We will keep sex scenes evocatively tasteful and crop explicit images. Yeah. As easy as blinking, Lee found himself laid back down on the stage. The rows and rows of empty seats stared down at him. Dreaming about doing it on a stage, did this make him some kind of exhibitionist? Should he try to imagine another location? Lee didn't have a ton of practice with lucid dreaming, but he'd done it enough to have felt out a few rules. And pushing the dream too far was the #1 mistake. A dream could only bend so far before it snapped, waking you up. You needed to go with the flow. So if Lee's subconscious was putting him on stage, that was that. Lee focused instead on imagining a partner. Nothing detailed, broad strokes only. Someone strong enough to push him down against the floor. Hands curling around Lee's wrists and tilting his chin up, caressing down his sides. The sensations appeared along his body, and Lee felt a soft laugh escape his lips. Not exactly what he'd been going for, but it felt good. Oh my, this is getting so much more than I expected early on. Like, I was expecting a little bit more horror and teasing into this with, like, a culmination. I did not expect this to start off immediately. One hand traced along his wrist, and another pair coalesced into view. The fingers of each hand were thick and plump, wrists promising to taper off into round, fat forearms. And though no mouth could be seen, no eyes glimpsed, there was an insistent push at the grip around his wrists, a dexterous, nimble work as the other hand stripped him. The presence of someone strong and intent on gobbling Lee up as quickly as possible. Sam, I didn't expect the spice right out of the gate, right? It's like, we know you only have 40 minutes left before the end of your stream. We're getting straight to the point here. Lee moaned, mouth widening in a broad smile. Hungry for me, aren't you? Fingers flexed around his throat, but instead of squeezing, one hand wrapped around his chin, thumb inserting, prying his mouth open. Thank you, Seriebot. Yeah, no slow burn here. Lee shuddered, hips rolling up. Then, grinning, he bit down. It withdrew immediately, fingers spread in surprise. It gave a comical shape and then wrapped its fingers defensively around the injured thumb. Lee felt a dark laugh rumble from his chest. That's what you get for trying to shut me up. I like guys who are mouthy in bed, and since you can't talk to me, I'll have to say enough for the both of us. The hand on Lee's thigh tensed, and it crossed Lee's mind vaguely that it seemed offended. It was the seizing up of someone who needed to process a slap in the face. But before he could laugh again, the injured hand flattened itself back out, clamping an airtight seal around Lee's mouth. Lee jolted, making to pull the hand off, but the force against his wrist held fast with the weight of an entire human. Someone larger than Lee, with leverage and gravity on its side. I do love how Lee is like, no, this has to be a lucid dream, right? It couldn't possibly be anything weird or paranormal or anything. So instead of being concerned, I'm just gonna be horny. A small, helpless laugh muffled against the gag hand. Well done. You got me. Putting me in my place, huh? As if in response, the hands got to work on him. It knocked the smile off of Lee's face, and he felt his arms go limp. His eyelids clamped down tight, and there was no retort on his lips. Lee is a bit of an asshole, but he is also, like, operating under the assumption that this is all a dream. I think that, like, if you can't be an asshole in your own brain, where can you be, right? Lee hadn't exactly been in the middle of a dry spell lately, but this preternatural insight into his weak spots was unfathomable. This was all happening ridiculously quickly, right? We were just saying that, very quick to the spice. Thoughts devolving into a mush of approval. Was it anthropomorphizing to imagine the insistent push of fingertips against him as smug? Was it just Lee's imagination, or did the thumb on his skin give him a teasing rub? Too hazy and stimulated to care, Lee half imagined a familiar face against his cheeks, eyes mocking and teeth exposed in either a grin or a threat, any words of affection tinged with an obnoxious self-conceit. The hand pushed up and his scream was muffled, pathetic. Lee had been on hormones for years at this point, and the size of everything below was proof of it. Sadly, it meant that the hand would need to get dexterous if it wanted to take care of him there too. Fortunately for both of them, the supply of hands themselves did not seem to have any limitation. All too soon it was over. Lee laid there, head foggy with delight, nothing at all to do but stay, spent and impossibly comfortable. Welcome back, JCD! We're playing a spicy visual novel now. Ghosts if you can touch. Why not start with hugs and cuddling? Yeah, this went straight to the spice. He felt the gentle fingers cupping his cheek, and then the pressure was gone. Wrists and legs free, body sated, and hands disappeared. It was just a dream after all, but it felt wrong to blink and just let himself wake up. With a happy groan, he raised his voice. The hands were gone, but he hoped that the presence wasn't. Corny supernatural shit, yeah. I see where the not safe for, yeah, has been chopped right off. I did choose specifically to play it in stream mode because I'm like, let's be honest, it's gonna be real awkward to play that on stream. So we're playing in streamer mode. Someone find a way to contact me and tell me when it's done. Well, we're streaming for another 15 minutes, so I don't know if we're gonna be playing anything after this. I'm not sure how long this demo is. That was fantastic. And probably pathetic that it happened in a dream, but it's got to be the best I've ever had. Great setting, great characterization, even without a face. 10 out of 10. Thanks, weird dream guy. New kink unlocked. If I pick someone up at the festival this week, I'll probably be thinking of you while I do it. And with that, Lee laid back, closed his eyes, and thought very hard about faces. Something clear and vivid and too sharp for the dream to hold. The guy who ran the theater, some of the regulars at the festival. The guy who worked the concessions, The weirdly hot blowhard who gave the 2-hour opening speech every year. Cary Grant projected up on the screen. Something specific and clear enough to wake him up. But when Lee opened his eyes, he was still there. Lee pulled up his pants and stood up, wet, wobbly, and confused. This wasn't the way a dream was supposed to progress. A sense of wrongness that, above all else, should have popped the fragile bubble of sleep. Lee reached for his wallet. Every card was in the right place, but that wasn't proof either. Dreams were a cumulative effect, but they were imprecise and couldn't handle details. Lee went piece by piece. Insurance card was there, the logo was clean. The text was clear and effortlessly legible. The expired date didn't wobble or morph. There was no vague sense of meaning, but dry, boring numbers and small print legal jargon. That was all the proof he needed, but he pulled out another item. An ironic video rental card, yellowed with the appropriate amount of age. Another, his library card as legible as the books he regrettably never checked out. His cash. George Washington's defaced face on the bill he'd found on the ground. A receipt for his latest hard drive, right there, 10 terabytes, no warranty, and he'd bought a candy bar at the same time. I mean, I could do with some 10 terabytes. He stuffed it all back in his pocket. Lee had already been covered in sweat, but it was no longer for a fun reason. And then, in the audience, something moved. Lee tried to call for help. His throat was dry, and the first sound out was a mortifying crack. He swallowed past the ache, but couldn't manage to loosen it up by much. What an odd sensation. But he supposed he had just tried to ask for help. He must have been too scared to make a sound. He didn't feel that way in his head. His thoughts felt calm and rational. Lee got to his feet and ran to the foot of the stage. He wasn't sure what he'd say, but if this person was the one who dragged Lee's sleeping form across the house, well, Lee could pummel the creep. But as he began to speak, his throat seized up. The sensation was distracting enough that he did not notice what was at the edge of the stage. There was a thick pane of glass stretching from floor to... He ran along the length of it, reaching as high as he could, but it didn't seem to end. He ran to the side of the stage, but the glass extended in front of the wings, trapping him in. Like hell it would. He ran back downstage, leaned back, and gave it a kick. It was thick. Industrial grade? But no pane this big could be so sturdy, right? In the audience, the form moved again. It was getting closer. He kicked again at the same spot. And again. Forced to admit that it wasn't working, he resorted to his tool belt. He apologized to his wrench. It wasn't the first time he'd gotten creative with his tools, but it still wasn't good for them. He rotated his whole body into the swing, aiming for the same spot he'd been kicking. But it wasn't leaving a dent. He ran his fingers over the glass, but it was perfectly smooth. He hadn't so much as scratched it. A wave of vertigo overtook him, and he stumbled, barely staying on his feet. The lights were growing brighter. And the thing in the seats was growing closer, too. With the spotlights up, Lee could still not get a look. But even as a silhouette, Lee could still feel its eyes on him. He didn't know when he'd fallen, but Lee's knees ached from hitting the stage, and his fingers gripped his temples. The shadow hadn't moved closer, but its presence had. Trying to think was like walking through water, a heavy presence weighing his mind down. The thing was a bubbling, churning mass of words, and the surface flickered and popped, flares of raw meaning surging and licking at Lee's face. Once upon a time... The gravity inside Lee's mind was beginning to break down. Concepts that once held strong ties were floating apart from each other, suddenly weightless. His hatred for a particular song, one played over and over by his college roommate. Lee could feel the emotion distancing itself from the music, and clumsily reattaching itself to vanilla ice cream, a flavor about which he was previously non-committal. The disgust filled his mouth, making him sick. New memories were seized upon, a childhood crush, the boy's warm, sunny smile, a look that made his younger self nearly float away with pride and contentment. It was peeling away from plump cheeks and big brown eyes, and reattaching itself to a girl in a silken gold, different in all aspects save for unattainability. Lee dug his nails into his scalp as though he could physically hold on to these concepts. He'd spent his whole life arranging himself to the shape he was in. Whatever this was, it was dissolving him down into component elements. The connections between emotion and concept were unraveling, threading themselves into new orbits. His grip was so loose, Lee could do nothing but float and watch this. Excuse you! He dug his nails deeper, breaking the skin. The pain did exactly what it was supposed to, screaming over the numbness that something was wrong, that he had to fight it and make it stop. His name was Liam Lee, and his mind was his own. He owned a Zune and 10,000 songs on it because he refused to swap out perfectly good hardware for something shiny and fashionable. He liked the tactile click of machine parts under his fingers and the sight of an external hard drive bursting with illegal software. He liked the way lower eyelids twitched when someone was upset with him, but he liked the solace of quiet even more. He did not like being kept in any one place, not without a good reason. And Lee did not give up control over his life, not without a very, very good reason. Lee needs to hold still because he is making this needlessly complicated. Funny. Needlessly complicated was the exact same feedback Lee had gotten from his last boss. The voice heaved a mighty sigh, and the room quaked, chandelier rattling. This really is what I get for acting desperate, isn't it? You can't blame me, though. I am very, very hungry. Lee swallowed. Am I on the menu? There was a pause. No. Another heavy sigh. No, I will have a more appealing food source in a few more hours. You may go. The glass surrounding the stage fizzled into nothing. It was too soon to let his guard down, but Lee's relief was undeniable. He readied to jump off the stage, but that thing was still lurking in the seats. Perhaps he'd leave through the back instead. A laugh boomed out around him. That choice is for the best, I think. I've decided to let you go, but if you were to walk closer to me, I couldn't be held responsible for my actions. Oh, is that the demo? Is that the whole thing? Oh no, okay, good. We still have more. Not that we have much time left, but still. Lee bolted upright and just about ran into the projector. His chest ached from fear and tension. A nightmare. He sat back down. That weird place. It had just been a nightmare. He was more tired now than when he had gone to sleep. His joints were all sore, especially his knees. Welcome to being old, Lee. That's what it's like. Sleep is not restful. You wake up exactly as tired as you were before, except for now your back also hurts. One of the crummiest things about dreams that felt real is that you went through an entire experience and then were just expected to forget about it. It wasn't real, so you couldn't complain to your friends about it. Lee, please leave the building while you can. You know he's not gonna do that. Not that Lee had any friends to speak of. No offense, of course, to his tools. He gave his wrench a loving pat. Hey, it was all scuffed up. Lee took good care of his tools, but it looked like someone had used it as a blunt force instrument. Nope. This whole nightmare was going straight into the vault. Everybody had a vault, right? Where you kept memories like college mistakes or bad emails from your mom. This was going into the vault too. One deep breath, and then time to start the day. Lee changed his clothes in the bathroom and then set about repairing the projectors. Soon, each of them was in top form. The festival thus saved, Lee decided to stretch his legs. Nobody was going to be bothering him for his badge, and he hummed happily, the day ahead of him full of old movies. It was what the festival was all about, the kinds of flicks that were unmistakably ancient but held up astonishingly well. He made his way downstairs on the hunt for a program, emerging into the atrium that now included light, the reedy sound of Top 40's hits through a poor sound system, and the arrival of other people. Events like this were full of two things: movies and cinephiles, and when you weren't watching one, you'd be listening to the other. Speakers were a mixed bag. For every engaging, informative speaker, there was always another one that was motivated by little more than the sound of their own voice. A couple of folks were stacking schedules on a table by the door, and Lee swiped one. He pulled out a pen, marking up the event list and striking out anything dull. A pair of attendees sidled up next to him, obtaining and perusing their own copies. "I got some Kubrick on the schedule this year." "Finally. Real cinema." "Yeah, I've got a theory or two on what was really going on in The Shining." One of them turned to Lee. "How about you? Got a favorite Kubrick?" These two were standing way too close. Maybe? Or was this a normal distance to be standing from another person? Lee felt simultaneously too aware of their bodies and too aware that it was weird to feel aware of them. Lee's last long conversation had been on Discord, and the one before that had been in person, but on a hookup. The mind had a different mindset at 10 p.m. in a loud bar. Rejection went down smooth and through a fake name and a haze of local liquor. The light was too real here, and there was no script for this conversation. With no ready lie, Lee opened his mouth and made the worst possible choice. He told the truth. Kubrick's kind of slow for me, but I did like Eyes Wide Shut. I don't know much about Kubrick. Like, don't get me wrong, I like movies, but I don't often follow directors and that sort of thing. But from what I understand, this is possibly the worst possible movie to tell a cinephile that you enjoyed. I mean, this guy learns that his wife occasionally has sexual fantasies about other men, and he just loses it. Everyone only talks about the orgy, but I think the lack of appeal of the main lead really drives home. The schedule booklet in hand, Lee had been looking at it, not at his conversation partners. He hadn't really been seeing either, though, frames from the movie filling up his mind's eye to such an extent that it rendered him virtually blind. Remembering that it was generally accepted that talking to other people usually involved not only verbal language, but visual social cues, Lee looked up. The expressions staring back at him weren't great, and an extremely loud, incorrect buzzer sounded in Lee's head. "Sounds like you've got some opinions on it." Lee's eyes returned to the floor. I guess. "So do you like Kubrick?" Not really. I just think a lot about..." What? He thought a lot about the stuff he watches? And the other people here didn't? If he kept blathering on, he was just going to insult a bunch of people who watched real movies, had real cinema thoughts. Like a godsend, that gave Lee a script, and he stuck to it this time. Anyway, I'll stop before I end up talking your ear off. Gotta go get some stuff done before the first showing starts. Character. Guy who watches normal movies. It helped a lot. His smile even felt genuine. Nothing weird or perverse or threatening here. Lee wasn't happy, but Joe or Chris or whoever he was right now was feeling chill. So, in that way, it wasn't even a lie. He paired it with a self-effacing laugh. Get a load of that guy who'd just been talking, right? What a loser. The muted expressions of discomfort softened into laughter, and Lee knew he'd nailed it. A small wave had turned down the polite invitation to join them for breakfast, and Lee escaped to the conversation, taking minimal psychic damage in the process. His focus returned to the schedule, flipping through the keynote speech, eager to see a name, one that didn't show up. I do think we are going to have to stop it there. It is 1 o'clock, which means it is time for the stream to end.